Human rights and marginality are intrinsically connected, so how can we work to ensure that inclusion isn't a matter of benevolent gifting? Botswana-born cultural architect Kolanyane-Kesupile makes a case to recognize the importance of people on the margins contributing to every inch of progress ever made.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kolanyane-Kesupile, a cultural architect and development practitioner from Gaborone, Botswana. I want to talk about inclusion and the unspoken tower of privilege, which most people who think it's their labor, and I won't use the word responsibility here, to perform inclusion find themselves sitting in. They sit in it and peer from it at the others. However, in my talk today, I'd like to borrow the column title, "There Are No Others," from history-making lawyer Lesego Nchunga. In 1976, the General Assembly proclaimed 1981 as the International Year of Disabled Persons. It called for a plan of action at the national, regional, and international levels, with an emphasis on equalization of opportunities, rehabilitation, and prevention of disabilities. Let's talk about that phrase, prevention of disabilities, in the context of 2020. It is now 39 years since this declaration was put into action. However, from the spaces that we work in as disability rights activists and advocates, we find that very little has changed. It begets the question, what are the things which disable us, and what too form the things which generate disabilities in themselves? I, as a cultural practitioner based in what is contextually called the Global South, am constantly faced by the inequalities that to the general person seem as though they're exceptions. When you look at a country like Botswana, where you're expected to be non-disabled in order to have access to your citizenhood and citizenship, the plight of persons with disabilities becomes that is considered by the average Botswana wanting special rights. Then let's talk about Black Lives Matter as a global movement, but something that I'm not only personally, but politically affected by. In countries where you are perhaps considered a racial minority, it is then valid to be able to point a finger at not only the institutional racism that comes at you, but also how systemic it is. But in the context of an African country where you are then part of the Black majority, it becomes much more complicated to point that finger. When we say Black Lives Matter in Botswana, we are not just talking about Black Lives Mattering by way of people and bodies, but we are talking from the perspective of confronting institutional and systemic racism, which is part of a colonial legacy. A colonial legacy which we are still working to ensure that we dismantle and disassociate ourselves from, because very often it keeps telling people, whether they're people with disabilities or LGBTQ plus persons or people who are considered racial or tribal minorities, that it is not their duty to perform or participate in inclusion, rather that they should be the beneficiaries. In this case, we then look at inclusion from the perspective of a majority that thinks it needs to do the labor. But I want to question, how do we work best to allow the margins to become the center? So not as a space where we talk about the margins, but we start to allow people on the margins to lead us towards understanding and building a world beyond exceptionalism. Again, with the case study of Botswana in 2019, when Justice Liburu and the bench of judges at the High Court struck down sections of the penal code which was inherited and ceased to be useful to the people it governed, when the decriminalization of consensual same-sex sexual practice was done, it was a move to allow for the acknowledgement by the courts the inclusion work that was what will come afterwards. It is the work which says to non-queer people, we as queer folk in a Black majority country would like to allow you another opportunity to get to learn from us how best to live alongside us, rather than please let us into your party, which very often tends to be the kind of outlook that people who are in that very tall tower of privilege find themselves in. Again, I will repeat, there are no others. And this is not where we should be coming from when we talk about inclusion, because as soon as we say, you are coming to our party, that begets arguments like, what about my rights? And false claims that some people are getting special rights. When the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was proclaimed in 1948, Article 1 states that human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Article 6 says everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. And so today I would like us to really question, where do we sit when we are faced with the task of inclusion? Do we find ourselves sitting in a position where we think it is a gift that we give to other people, where we are then the benefactors who from our tall towers of privilege say, oh yes, usually you wouldn't be allowed to come here, but let us give you a chance to see the world from our end? Or do we say, we truly will be more stronger, we will be more enriched by having everyone able to access and inhabit this space? So when I say inclusion, to me, it is not about asking for permission to come to somebody's party. It is in fact a call to say, let us be richer and stronger together.